that are being fed GMO versus non-GMO, he said that's exactly what we're finding in our autistic children.
Our son is 9.5, and he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder about 6 years ago. And we've used many interventions in his therapy, but about 2 years ago we learned about GMO foods and the potential harm of this kind of food in ourselves and in our son. And particularly in the last 2 years we've seen some nice improvements in combination with other things, but keep cleaning up his diet with non-GMO foods has been a big success for us.
I just always felt there had to be a connection to autism and all the gut-related problems that our kids have. My son in particular always had GI problems, fungal infections and parasites, bacteria, viruses in his GI tract that we had been treating over the years. But until we took GMO completely out of his diet, did I see the biggest change in him, behaviorally especially.
My son is 10 years old now. He's autistic, and about 5 years ago we learned at an autism conference about GMOs, and we just decided immediately that that was one of the things we were going to have to change about his diet. And when we did, the change was quite profound. He had a lot of gut issues, as do most children with autism, and we noticed immediately a relief in the symptoms. The bloating and the horrible bowel movements seemed to subside substantially, and now his gut is like a neurotypical kid. It's really amazing. And we haven't done much to his gut other than get him on an organic diet and get him away from the GMOs.
The vast majority of genetically modified crops are engineered to make it easier for farmers to kill weeds. For example, Monsanto's Roundup-ready crops, which comprise most of today's GMOs, can survive applications of Monsanto's best-selling weed killer, Roundup.
The active ingredient of Roundup is called glyphosate, and it was patented as an herbicide by Monsanto in 1974. But 10 years earlier, it was patented as a broad-spectrum chelator. Now, chelation is the molecular level of hugging and not letting go. The way that it kills weeds is it makes the nutrients unavailable to the plant, so it weakens the defenses of the plant. Then it promotes the diseases in the soil, which end up killing the plant. Now, this means that plants treated with Roundup have a reduction in available nutrients. They're weak and they're sick. The animals that eat the nutrient-deficient plants, they become nutrient deficient and weak and sick. Then we eat the animals and the plants that are nutrient deficient, and we may become weak and sick. In addition, the residues of the Roundup in the plant can end up in our bodies where they can chelate, hug some of the nutrients that are in our bodies, making them less available as well.
In areas, very often right to the row specifically where the glyphosate was applied, those plants are getting sicker earlier. Tissue tests are documenting deficiencies in manganese, copper, and zinc. As a result, the food is less nutritious. It's showing up in the animals, and glyphosate use is doing it, and it's following and working its way right up the food chain.
Those deficiencies are very well documented as being factors in animal diseases as well as in human diseases.
The glyphosate problem has a number of issues for us, and one of the very sad side effects of glyphosate are birth defects. In the towns where people were workers on the farm, particularly the soybean farms, we had as much as 70 times increase in the number of birth defects in these sprayed areas.
Lab animals fed Roundup-ready soy have had serious reproductive disorders. In mice, the testicles changed, including damage to the young sperm cells. In rats, there were changes in the uterus and ovaries. The DNA functioned differently in the embryo offspring of mice. When female rats were fed genetically modified soy, more than half of their babies died within 3 weeks. The babies were also smaller and could not reproduce. When mice were fed genetically modified Roundup Ready and BT corn, they had fewer babies and smaller babies. Preliminary evidence that's not yet published can be even worse. In rats, the testicles changed from pink to blue. In hamsters, by the third generation, most lost the ability to have babies. Some had hair growing in their mouths. There's a virtual epidemic of reproductive disorders in the livestock in the U.S. Some veterinarians and scientists started examining the aborted fetal tissue of livestock that had miscarriages. And they found an organism that was new to science.
We're still not quite sure what it is. We have the DNA now that's in the process of being analyzed. So it's a very small entity, but it can cause reproductive failure.
This new organism is in high concentrations of soy and corn products that have been sprayed with Roundup.
Had a producer northwest of the Twin Cities last year that called me and was losing calves to miscarriages, and some cows were dying. He was feeding his cows Roundup Ready corn silage sprayed with Roundup. We had liver samples that were sent to a university and found they were all short on manganese, and we had feed samples sent out to a third party to get us into the testing lab for that organism, and it was loaded with the organism.
Secretary Vilsack, as governor of Iowa years earlier, was awarded Biotech Governor of the Year. He's now in charge of agriculture in the United States. Dr. Don Huber sent a letter to Secretary Vilsack describing this organism and describing it as an emergency.
I felt that it would be irresponsible for me as a scientist not to alert the Secretary of Agriculture to the serious nature of the situation as it was developing.
Dr. Huber wrote, "For the past 40 years, I have been a scientist in the professional and military agencies that evaluate and prepare for natural and man-made biological threats, including germ warfare and disease outbreaks. Based on this experience, I believe the threat we are facing from this pathogen is unique and of a high-risk status. In layman's terms, it should be treated as an emergency."
He asked the Secretary to hold off on the approval of Roundup Ready alfalfa, because that would increase the use of Roundup in the United States, and if Roundup were linked to this organism, it would pour fuel onto this fire. A few weeks after the letter was received, Huber got a call from the USDA, and he gave them the names of some scientists and veterinarians to talk to. 6 months later, they still hadn't been contacted. Unfortunately, the USDA is completely ignoring the problems with Roundup. They just approved Roundup Ready alfalfa in 2011, as well as Roundup Ready Kentucky bluegrass.
I've been writing a syndicated newspaper column called Animal Doctor for about 40 years. And it was in the late 1990s that I started receiving letters from several of my 25 to 30 million readers across the United States, indicating that their dogs and cats were having various health problems. And when I advised them to switch the animal's diet to get rid of genetically engineered corn and soybean, and the animals started getting better, I have what I call evidence-based medicine, that their health problems were most likely primarily being caused by genetically engineered corn and soybean, and possibly the Roundup herbicide glyphosate residue.
I've got my first major livestock producer that feeds about 5,000 head of cattle. He just made a transition here within the last year in my community.
A lot of trouble with cattle dying the longer you fed them genetically modified crop. The longer we'd feed them, the more deaths we would have. We wouldn't lose cattle the first 60 to 80 days on feed, and from then on we would start losing them 1 or 2 a week. And when we switched, the cattle have been a lot calmer, and we've had a lot less pneumonia and health issues since that time.
A pig farmer in Denmark switched to non-GMO soy in April 2011. Within 2 days, the piglet's serious and sometimes fatal diarrhea virtually disappeared. After switching, disease rates plummeted. Death from ulcers and stomach-related sicknesses disappeared, as did a string of horrible birth defects. Conception rates and litter size also increased.